Please feel free to join our circle. We love circles, but if you're nervous, you can skulk. But I can see you. My name is Margaret Dragu, and this is Elizabeth Chitty, and this is Randy Lee Cutler, and I have, for full disclosure, I'm intimate with both of these women, with Elizabeth for a very long time because she's also my sister, and an adopted sister. And for many, many decades, and it was actually maybe about 12 years ago I spoke with her real sister, who said that, well, early on when you first did the sister thing, I was a little jealous. But now, years later, I understand that you're really close and that it was really kind of Elizabeth to take you on as a sister. And thank you for being a sister. And Randy is a very intimate and important part of our performance art community and artist community in Vancouver. So we run into each other a lot. I love your talks, performances. So I love these two. So just thought I'd tell you that I'm, not impartial or anything. So today we're going to be talking about walking and performance, and we're each going to make a very short presentation. Mine is completely chaotic. I just wanted to share with you, and some of you may already know this webpage, but it's on Facebook, this Facebook page, I mean. It's the Global Performance Art Walks. I love that picture of that naked woman with the hot red hair there walking. And this, like all Facebook pages, it kind of drifts off topic, so not everything here is about walking. But there's often some very nice things here, and there's two things I hope to find to share with you. Now, why is that not rolling down? Where is that?
It's somewhere around the right.
Top row, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so just to let you know, the 19th of October is International Day of Walking. And so this is a very short video from Dia del Caminar Descalzo, posted by David Sebastian Lopez Restrepo. Hopefully we'll have a little sound here. So the idea is that on the 19th of October, you walk barefoot somewhere, choose the location, duration, and reason, and publish an audiovisual documentation on this Facebook page. So you might want to, maybe you want to do that. The other thing I want to share with you is this thing, this women's festival thing. Walk, light walks, man walks pet tour to see Japan, like that ice thing. I think it's close to here. The Walking Poets in Japan, that looks interesting. Lots of neat things on this page. This weird guy from California walks people because they're lonely. No, he's not weird. That sounds pejorative, but it's one of those kind of press journalist things. But interesting, always interesting.
La la la.
La la la, we're almost there. Are we in July yet? August. Okay, well here it is, Fourth World Congress of Psychogeography. Well, there's another one about women, but we'll look at this one. So this is in England, and I've seen a lot of festivals, and they use this term. I just wanted to bring it up, Psychogeographic Festival. And they, like they do in England, have a sort of different take on things, but they have these various walks that come particularly from the Guy Debord Le Flaneur school of thought about walking. And there was a reply in this one too from a women's only festival, which was mostly commenting that so much of that work was male. I just wanted to bring that thought forward because we of course have two fabulous women here who walk a lot. And there it is, the Walking Women Weekend of Events. There we go. So this is also something to take a boo at. And I just want this little quote here. The invisibility of women in what appears as a canon of walking is conspicuous where they are included. It is often as an exception to an unstated norm, represented by a single chapter in a book or even a footnote. I just wanted to share that thought. So that's the end of my little presentation. Look at this Facebook page. Maybe consider participating in the International Barefoot Walking thing on the 19th. And now I would like to present our two fabulous women. I'm going to read both their bios quickly, even though I know you can read. And I don't have my glasses.
So this could take a while.
So this could take a while. Lights are good. So I'm going to read them both, and then Randy Lee is going to make a presentation, and Elizabeth is going to make a presentation, and then we're going to start talking. Okay? And if you need bathrooms, they're out this hallway into that main space is the women's. I don't know where the men's is. I didn't look for it. Okay, Randy Lee Cutler is a Vancouver-based artist, writer, and educator. Her practice takes up themes of sustenance and materiality through performance, video, installation, and image. In the intersections of gender, art, science, and technology, she investigates the emergence of new cultural forms while maintaining an experimental relationship to pedagogy, gardening, and embodiment. And Elizabeth Chitty. Interdisciplinarity has been at the core of Elizabeth Chitty's artistic practice for 41 years. Sight, corporality, temporality, and attention to process thread through her work, which addresses being in a body, a place, with others. She creates performances and video and sound installations and lives in St. Catharines, Ontario. Welcome, Elizabeth and Randy. Randy, let's have your presentation, please.
It's there. It's
Take it
there.
away.
You just need to pull down the Chrome.
If my head's in the way, tell me to move.
First touch.
Could you move a little bit?
Okay. I'll move along.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I thought I'd do the salt walk this morning at 10:30, so I'm keeping my salt apron on. If anybody wants to taste any salt afterward, I'd be happy to share some with you, 5 different times. As the intro that Margaret read, I do a lot of different things, so I'm just focusing here on 2 projects that I've done in terms of walking. But I see Elizabeth used the word corporeality. I think, something we share. For me, I use the term embodiment. But it's the idea that embodiment is a kind of knowledge. Knowledge certainly is a kind of space of the brain, but it's also a space of the body. And it's that bodily space that I'm particularly invested in. So happily, 7811D curated the project Salt Walks. I first did it in Vancouver, which was curated at Art Speak Gallery as part of an exploration of social practice. Sean Dacey was the curator. Did 3 walks there. In Chinatown, because the art gallery is in Chinatown. And I chose 3 sites, or 3 themes. The first one was herbal remedies, so we went to a traditional Chinese medical store. The second one was food preservation, and we went to a Chinese grocery store. And the third was crystal structures, and we went to a crystal store, because salt is a crystal. And on these walks, I did a reconnaissance ahead of time and found people to go and talk to for each walk. So the first one, I spoke to the fellow who owns the traditional Chinese medical store. The second one, I brought in Howie Tsui, who's an artist originally from Ottawa, working in Ottawa, originally from Hong Kong, talked about his experience, particularly with XO sauce, which is a sauce that apparently, particularly in Hong Kong, but throughout China. And and then the crystal store owned by another Chinese fellow, Edward Gutierrez. So I tried to explore what was specific to the area, in that case, Chinatown. And the way I work is I think about it as whatever material I work with as a lens to sort of explore the wider context. In Nanaimo, I was curated a show called Gleaners, which was about drawing from the environment in some form. And there's a pulp and paper mill in the Georgia Strait. So I learned a lot about pulp and paper and how salt is used in generating the pulp that's used to make paper. And here I am in Toronto. So I'm sort of thinking this is my kind of concert T-shirt in some way, and maybe I can add them. We'll see. People still want me. So the way this sort of started was an interest in salt, partly because my girlfriend was really into salt, so she introduced me to it. And then I discovered there's different kinds of salt. And then the more I learned, I realized that salt became a lens. The salt walk became important as a way to share these ideas, partly because so much of my practice is education, but also there's something about walking and thinking, and it releases the brain. The idea that as you walk, it creates a rhythm in your body, and that rhythm allows certain pressures of the day to subside and allows things to bubble up. I find personally when I'm working on something, if I have something I'm trying to figure out, I go for a walk, and that walk inevitably something works out, because I don't know, it does something. I actually wrote an essay for C Magazine a few years ago called From the Peristaltic to the Peripatetic. Peristaltic is the movement of your digestive system as it moves through your system, and peripatetic is the fancy word for walking, and particularly walking and thinking in some way. So it's bringing together a lot of different things. And then I had the salt apron made by an artist in Vancouver, Natalie Pershowitz, as a way to walk with the salt and a way to distribute the salt. One of the concerns I had was not wanting me to touch the salt, and then to be hygienic, and also for people. So I came up with the test tube, which I thought was kind of significant. And the wonderful thing is, each place I go to, on the one hand, it's scary because you're going to a new town and you're introduced to a new audience, but also you learn so much. So I've learned a lot about Hyde Park, where I did the first walk. I learned about the geological formation underneath southwestern Ontario, which is called the Onondaga Formation, which is made out of dolomite and limestone and a lot of salt, and it slopes toward Toronto. Learned about the salt production at Goderich in Lake Huron, and also discovered that there was a salt baths in Hyde Park from 1900 to 1960, which was called the Minis, and a lot of people went there. So it was really important to go to Hyde Park, and I love the idea of us going for a walk. I mean, it's not a long walk, those of you that went on it. I mean, I could do a longer walk, but it's also taking into account the different abilities of the people you're with. Not everybody can walk long distances. So this one I did in Vancouver. It's this kind of, in some ways it's quite intimate. You're sort of tapping into someone's hand. There's something very lovely about that. And the intriguing thing when I did this walk in Chinatown, one of the points I made and I learned really quickly is you don't have to go very far to have a conversation about salt. So the gallery actually is just like a little bit further down here, and started talking about, obviously salt is in most of the food that we eat. If you eat meat, the animals are eating salt naturally in the landscape. But also there's salt in all of our clothes. Salt is used to make dye and to fix the color. Salt is used in rubber, it's used in glass, in construction, pharmaceuticals. So something that's somehow so innocuous is actually everywhere. So it was kind of ironic that, it's a salt walk, but I took everybody, we started the gallery and we actually walked 10 steps and we stopped. And then we walked 2 steps and we stopped. So the notion of salt walks is getting people out of the gallery. That's very important to me. It's also a kind of echo of Gandhi's Salt March, which was in 1930, when under British rule, India were not allowed to harvest their own salt. So he generated the salt walk. It was about 70 kilometers. But I think that's really important too, that there's a lot of history of walking in relationship to protest, which is definitely an inspiration for me. So there were particularly 3 different sites, so this is the first one, the traditional Chinese medicine, and we're in the shop and talking with Albert Falk, who's the proprietor there of TCM, and he was telling me that TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, is not a word that's used in Chinese. It's not called medicine, it's called health food. It's interesting, we think about what a health food store looks like to us, and this is what a health food store looks like to the Chinese. I already talked a little bit about this on the talk, but what they have in the containers is quite fascinating. In Vancouver, they have seahorse and full display, and in Vancouver, apparently, it's illegal. So it's kind of differences I find quite intriguing, who determines what's illegal and how that affects them. All of the shops seem to have shark fin But from what I understand, it's no longer being imported, but if it's here, they're allowed to sell it. It's a bit dodgy to me, but interesting. And there's also fish bladder, which is the secondary bladder of the fish, which allows them to have buoyancy. So we talk a lot about that. We talk about the relationship of soy sauce, which is originally when the Chinese developed soy sauce in about 1000 BC, it was to stretch salt. It was to make salt go longer because it was so such a rare commodity. And then there were two other ones, the food preservation, so we're sort of standing amongst the food, this is how we eat sui, and we're sort of talking about all these ingredients and how we actually brought some of the XO sauce that he had made, and everybody's tasting it and smelling it, and sort of pointing to the ingredients. And some of the intriguing things here is if you're going with someone who's used to these kinds of environments, we asked how do you decide which shrimp to buy? You know, when you go to these shops, especially if I know in Vancouver, there's like 6 different kinds of shrimp, if not more, and I can see they're different. So we sort of got some expert advice from Howie on that. And Edward Gutierrez runs a crystal shop in Vancouver, and we talked a lot about salt as a crystal, because salt is made out of positive, negative ions that sort of come together in a crystal formation. And we talked about how salt is cleaned with, how crystals are cleaned with salt, and how they're energized with salt. And also, because it's negative and positive ions, there's energy in salt. So we talked about how salt energizes the body. In Chinese culture, there's such a thing called qi, so the inside. But if you have a crystal, you're actually holding qi, so it mirrors the inside of your body in some way. So for me, it's an interesting practice in terms of walking. Not only taking a group of people for a walk, but I spend many months ahead of the walk, going for walks, going into stores, introducing myself, and telling them what I'm doing, and more often than not, they look at me like I'm crazy. Edward took me to, at first I was having problems making the connection, and Edward took me to a local TCM shop and introduced me to this woman. She was not interested at all. She thought I was too intellectual, which I think a lot of artists think as well. But I thought that was kind of intriguing. But the thing I really like about it, and what I love about what I do is I like process. I love the end result of sharing the work, but I love exploring and figuring out what the piece actually is. So that whole reconnaissance of introducing myself to shopkeepers was just amazing. I loved it. Then I did another project. This was last fall. There was an exhibition at Emily Carr in our concourse gallery, and it was all about, it's called Imagining Our Future, because Emily Carr is moving to a new site. And it was part of, it's called the Commons, so bringing people together. So I did this project which was called Prototype for a Therapeutic Action. So I was trying out this new idea, and it involved a variety of things, and one of them was a walk. I actually went for a walk with a therapist, and we talked about walking in her practice, because she has, usually you go to a therapist, you sit down, but she also goes for walks with people, depending on what they're dealing with. So we talked about the role of walking in terms of therapy, and then I had a wall text which described that walk with the therapist, but I also included things that I've collected in my walks. So part of this was a retreat from the library, and there's collections of books from the library that have to do with walking or politics or protest. These are crystals that I've collected and sometimes take with me on walks. This shell I got in near Chuckanut Drive, just in Washington State. It's like this big. It's an oyster shell. It's got to be like 80 years old. And lots of shells that I've collected, pieces of lichen. So it's sort of, part of walking is a therapeutic process, but it's also being very attentive to the world around you. And also, it's amazing how many different feathers you can collect of different birds going for walks if you're really paying attention. Give credit to my girlfriend who has better eyes than I do. I think this is from the redwoods that we collected. So everything is from there. This is a bowl of ginkgo biloba, which is a tree that grows in my neighborhood, which is a medicinal herb. So I collected books. I chose these partly because of the color. I thought they were quite beautiful. This is from the last documenta. They had, I think, 100 books. And I pulled out the ones that resonated for me and inspire me. So often when I read a lot, but I find that walking is a way that I can digest what I read. It's important to put everything away. So I think about walking as a kind of digestive process. It's good for digestion. They say after you eat a good meal, you should go for a walk, but also to digest the environment. And in the book launch, I'm going to be sharing a book I wrote called Open Wide. An Abecedarian for the Great Digestive System, which is a book about digestion as a metaphor for experience. So this is related to it. And I'm sure I've been talking to Francisco about this, how we kind of, when we make an artwork, we often work through it over several years, and it has various iterations. So this is sort of things that I'm sort of bringing together, so the things that I find on my walks from different places. So this one is from the Redwoods, this one is from Phoenix, Arizona, and a piece of selenite. And sort of assembling it in ways, I could think about it hugging or nurturing it in some way. And sort of bringing things together in different configurations. This is kind of a surprise to me. I never thought I'd be the person who was interested in crystals or the New Age, but there you are. I actually have a sabbatical starting in January, which is all about crystals and mineral formations. I'm interested in them as scientific objects, aesthetic objects, and New Age objects. So I'm trying to find the kind of intersections of these material forms in some way. So it's all interrelated. So the walking is a part of an art practice, but it's also a way to stay sane. And it's also a way to learn about a neighborhood in some way. I think the last part of this was, part of this piece was I created what I called therapeutic action cards, which I'm going to have them at the book launch as well. So there are 5 action cards which have an image on one side and a text on the other. So this is the image, which is in my office at home. Bring a talisman with you on a walk where you live. Pay attention to how this object informs your embodied sense experience. So the idea is you take one of these for a walk. Maybe you take a crystal, maybe you take something else that inspires you. So there are 5 in total, and each one sort of takes up a different aspect of walking. And in terms of, so this one is Spanish Banks in Vancouver, and it's really about the marine life. This one here is about finding herbs in your neighborhood. This one I took in Banff, and I think this one's about trees, and I can't remember the text. I have them here, but they're not in front of me. So that's it. That's what I wanted to share with you, and if you have any questions, happy to talk about it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. Please, thank you.
So I'm going to whip through some slides without saying much about them, and if there are things that come up that you want to ask me later, you can. And I'm mostly going to talk about one recent work. And Margaret, would you give me a 2-minute warning if I start talking too much?
I will take a look, but feel free. Everything is interesting so far. But
Okay, so I did a series of works in the 1990s, which at the time I called, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Landscape-based performance, where the audience walked on trails and paths past what I called image sites. This was the first one, called Hortus Amalgamum, Garden of Images. And it took place in a garden where I actually lived in rural Niagara at the time, but in St. Catharines. And I'm not going to talk much about these works, I'll remind myself. There was slide projection, and it was mostly on trees, which with mixed results, I might add. But this was a staircase that I draped. And I projected images of iconic buildings in the city on the trees and on these steps. This was the next one in this series, Paysage et Nocturne, pardon my French, and it took place in an exchange with artists mostly from Alma, Chitty. And it was I was very interested in the site as a series of types of landscape. It started in a pastoral setting, and the audience walked through the trail where this work is very low budget and low tech, and it was photocopies lit by flashlights and such. And in this period of time, I was also working with a series of images of the senses. You can't actually see very clearly, but I found a very old battery-powered slide projector, and this is an image of a heart and lungs, which was also a key image of my work at that period. And so it started in a pastoral setting, went through a trail, and ended at a high point overlooking a quarry. And I carried out some actions on the top of a gravel mound, including sort of partially rolling down it. This was in Grimsby in that same series at a trail called Nature of the Body. And the last work in this series was in fact done at the very first 7A 11D festival called Progress of the Body. So I didn't, during this period of time I was a fan of Hamish Fulton, but I didn't call this work a walking practice. I don't think I even used the word practice. And it was many years before I took up walking again, and I picked up the tradition of sound walks that is generally considered to originate with Mary Schaefer. And it was in part because of a relationship that I had with NASA, New Adventures in Sound Art, here locally. And so I did a couple of walks, and it was in that same garden, in fact. And then I picked it up again with as a work that was part of a work in a group show about water. And I called it a sound and image walk, and introduced the taking of photographs with the people walking. Now, this is the work I'm going to talk about a fair amount. Confluence Field Trips, and the multiple is being launched here this afternoon. I'm going to go to the actual website, I decided. So this project, which took place last year and ended mostly in January of this year, had a website, and it has this score. Nobody actually used the score. I didn't really care, but and there were 3 field trips which I identified, and the project was predicated by the building of 2 new arts buildings in the city, and it has to do with a particular site called Canal Valley, which is fascinates me as for its cycles of wilderness, industry, abandonment, neglect, and reclamation. And I live in a small city which is one of the Rust Belt cities, like so many places in North America, where manufacturing left. And the regional and municipal governments fairly, in the last 10 years, took up the Richard Florida economic development theories. So anyway, I won't talk too long about it, because I could go on and on. So I built this section called Explore. And this is an important point to me because on the walks, I see my role as an artist as facilitative and enabling. And it's very much about animating a place for the people who live there, and building a structure and a context which will enable the people who live there to claim space, hear and be heard, and see and be seen. So there's various information, like Confluence Field Trip number 2. What I do is, I don't give a guided walk, and I don't give a lecture on the walk. And sometimes I have to really explain to people that this is not a guided walk, because that's the convention that people expect. And I did a great deal of outreach for this project. And some of it was very successful, and I'll speak about it in a sec. And some of it didn't have any results. A lot of it didn't have any results because those people couldn't kind of grasp the, I think in a way, the uselessness of it. And for example, I was disappointed I didn't have any field naturalists. But I was told, like, the naturalist group just like couldn't kind of wrap their head around like what it was I was asking them to do. I was asking them to bring their knowledge into this site. There's a whole audio component, which those of you who have been on daylighting walks, the last one's today at 4, that's the same convention. You'll hear a little bit of audio, and it'll allow me to talk about a couple of the successful outreach attempts. So what this really does is I see it as a community resource, and it's filled with links more than written text. And I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, I think. So an installation was built of this. So it's a website, it's a walking project, it's an installation, and it's the multiple. I also had a couple of other aspects to it. I had a talking circle with a wonderful organization called Start Me Up. Niagara has one of the highest poverty rates in Canada, believe it or not. And there's a wonderful organization, a grassroots organization, which did participate in my project. And they work with streetmen close to the street people. And the site, the second Conflicts Field Trip number 2, which is in the middle right now of this massive reclamation. And it's totally serendipitous that, like, one of my buttons in my multiple, the graffiti is gone because this site's being reclaimed. And it was primarily for many years associated with sex work and drug use. Speaking of sex work, I worked really hard, and on that, and it didn't have results, which is just one of the chances working with a very vulnerable population. But I did talk to some sex workers, one of whom said, I'm just so all over this, I just can't wait to come and do this walk and talk, and because she'd worked in the site so much. She was out of the trade by then. Anyway, as I said, I could talk a lot, and I'm trying to not. So this installation had large 45 minutes. I had 9 hours of video. It all had audio. I made a 45-minute video which was projected, and the audio to that video was heard in the background through internal speakers in the gallery. Then I had a 4-channel audio going on the side. This is like one of the speakers. And then there were 5 stations with complete walks, and you could sit at the bench and put on the headphones and listen to the audio. So for those of you who haven't been on daylighting walks, people on the walks talk. I pass around. I ask for as much silence as people can muster, and that varies. But I pass around a Zoom and ask people to say what they would like into it. So we're going to hear a little tiny bit of audio. It's just like a couple minutes.
It's a lot of garbage, but it seems as if it could be someone that's home, but at the same time, not a healthy home.
I'm sitting on a log here, and I don't know, it just feels like I'm not the first one. Like, there's just presence here, and there's no one around, and there's nothing happening, but it just feels like old. Like used.
When I'm down here long enough, I start to breathe. It takes a long time for me to breathe, but I finally start to breathe again. Ears get stretched too. It was declared quite dead quite a few years ago, and when we had one of the harvest festivals, one of the people from Start Me Up was down taking a picture, and there's a picture of a great blue heron. And according to some of the traditions, when the herons come, it means the water's coming.
Renewal.
Renewal. So that was exciting.
Yes, I've seen that great blue a
Have you?
number of times.
Beautiful.
Yes, very exciting.
Yeah. But isn't that nice because it you know, that things can restore.
Yes.
Beaucoup de choses me viennent à la tête et peut-être que je vais en parler petit à petit. Chers compatriotes, comme toi, cher Richard, je viens du Sénégal aussi. Et quand on m'a parlé de toi, je te tutoie parce que, en tant que compatriote, je me suis dit, c'est un personnage à connaître.
So very briefly, the last two voices, the second to the last one was from the Start Me Up walk. And the last one was something else I was really happy about. I went to a Black History Symposium and met a man who's actually chair of modern languages at Brock University. And he came on a walk with a man who was born in Senegal. And this confluence is 12 Mile Creek and Dix Creek. And Dix Creek is named for Richard Pierpoint, who was stolen from Bondu and was a slave. And it's just one of the, it's very little known, well, Black history in Ontario in general, but nobody, anyway, so I was thrilled that this guy came and that he was Senegalese. And then I'm gonna whip through this because I'm out of town. Out of time. This is a videotape called Walking the Talk, and this is an artist garden called The Grass is Still Green, and it's work that refers to walking the talk, the video, and The Grass is Green is about the two-row wampum, and Vanessa is in the show reading the talk, which is Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe artists addressing Dish with One Spoon. And I was invited to do a companion exhibition, and as a settler, I felt it was appropriate to address two-row. So I have run out of, very quickly, that's just a hot talk. Keswick Douglas and I did a talk about our role as artists in the time of reconciliation. That's me growing the plants because I work in the nursery trade to make some money in the spring. And this is Kelly Davis, who did the actual teaching on the two-row. We worked on this youth planting idea, really hard to get youth engaged. But we did have equal numbers of settler kids who had no idea what their cultural heritage was. They're just Canadian. And these fellows are very recent settlers from the Middle East, and then two Haudenosaunee girls. So that is my shtick.
Great. Thank you. So thank you. Those were great presentations, and I have, of course, 4,000 questions, but I'm going to limit myself to one so that everybody else can participate as well. Okay? And I really revel in your rigorous, both of your rigorous research and content in these walks. But I'm going to ask a question about form first, and then we can go anywhere you want to take it. I would like both of you to ask, and you started to address this a bit, Randy, about digestion, etc. But what does walking as a form give you for your practice that nothing else does? So when you have an idea for a project, something about walking makes you say, this has to be in the form of a walk. So what does walking give you as a form for your practice, both of you?
My work is about place, and I am very concerned with embodiment, and being in the place is just kind of obvious for me. So walking is a very, just kind of a no-brainer thing to do in a place. And I'm interested in taking people into places. Like, again, this piece, that site is in the middle of this sort of social change, but it's a site of total abandonment that is the site of the birth of the municipality. And it's has people went on the walk who'd lived in St. Catharines all their life and said, oh, I've never been here. So I want to take people physically into the place
Right.
where they live.
You don't want to show them a picture or send them online. You want to bring
Exactly.
their bodies with you.
Yeah. So the research part is online, and people can do that or not, but the walking project is critical that people get their butts there.
Anything to add to that, Randy, about your impulse to make people walk?
My work's definitely, it's about space and time and materiality. So the walk is a way to experience space. It is about place, it's always about a location, but it's also about space, that we are spatial entities and we move through space and how we negotiate that. And also the notion of time, because a walk takes time. Often when you experience an artwork that's in situ, the time can be as short as 30 seconds, depending on your attention span, or it can be more durational. So I like the durational aspect of walking. In terms of digestion, I borrow from digestion a lot in terms of the metaphor. And so it takes space, for food to move through your body, and it takes time. So there's something about the durational aspect of walking that allows myself, as well as the people that experience it, for it to sort of move through them. So it's not just, you don't get one thing, you get many things. And each person on the walk gets something completely different, which I really like. And in terms of materiality, there's something about the walking, and you're experiencing the weather, and you're experiencing, depending on what's underneath your feet, if it's concrete, if it's grass, if it's gravel, there's a kind of physical relationship. And also, depending on the nature of the walk, but the idea of actually working with the trees, and working with rocks, and working with materials that are everywhere that we don't see them. So it's a way to slow down durationally to actually experience the material world that we're in.
And because I promised, I'm going to open it up for questions for everyone on walking and these salty and water-based filled walk practices.
It's a nice combination, isn't it? Salt and water.
Yes. And you're so...
Well, and having been on both walks, Elizabeth, at the beginning you told us to think about our bodies as water, the water in our bodies that we're moving. And Randy, at the beginning of her walk, said, think about the salt in your body.
Yes.
In the
Yes.
moving. So there was a nice confluence there as well.
You have so many things in common, and yet you're so incredibly different that it's super cool. Anyways, someone else. Thoughts from the walks?
Well, I'd like to actually, I think your question is an interesting thing that I'd like to pick up on, because
Go ahead.
it's very hard to, it seems like it's very hard to talk about just the walking itself, because it seems like the walking is, in the way you're presenting it, the walking is kind of a medium for approaching content. And it seems a little harder to just think about the walking itself and what that brings to the moment itself. And I'm not sure what the question exactly is, but I'll give you something I was thinking about as the two of you were talking. I was thinking about Tanya Mars had done a work early on called Picnic in the Drift that was like all these, various, she tried to bring these different scenes together that were not necessarily totally related in a spatial way in a theatrical setting. And it was a huge, enormous piece and it's sort of a flop in terms of the response of the audience. And then years later, she did this Tyranny of Bliss project where it was essentially the same idea of all these disparate, separate kind of scenarios, but because it was stretched out along University Avenue and Queen Street, people had to walk from one station to the next, and it didn't bother them that the connections weren't immediately obvious, because the walking itself created a story in their own bodies that they could then figure out what the confluences were, and it kind of opened up people's appreciation of their own ability to make the story out of the images, as opposed to feeling like I'm being told the story and I need to understand exactly what the structure of it is. So I think that may be one of the sort of underlying things about what a walk is and how it allows us to address the material that's offered to us in the images and in the moments of discourse, etc., that both of you create in the work itself. It's just a comment, but I think there's a question there, but I don't know what it is.
Now, can you respond to that sort of sensory feeling that Paul has about connectivity?
One of the things that comes to mind is, when you take people on a walk, everybody's the performer, right? Which I quite enjoy. Like the idea of being with a group of people, going for a walk, you see people around always looking like what's going on. Obviously, if I'm wearing white and carrying this, people are looking, and there's a group of people. If we start off silently walking, it looks a little unconventional. So we all become performers in that way, which is quite lovely, right? And we all kind of, I don't know if we bond as a group, but there's a dynamic that happens with that group. There's a shared generosity that's there that I think is really important. So the walk affords this kind of performative aspect. It assures a kind of temporary community building, which I think is quite lovely. And also the attentiveness that's there, attentiveness to your own body, attentiveness to the elements. And also, for those of us that work in non-conventional ways as artists, the idea of making work outside of a gallery, I think, is really profound. So what I enjoy about the walks is that it draws people, obviously artists, a lot of performance artists, but it also draws people that are not invested in art and actually don't go to art galleries, but the walk somehow intrigues them. So often we had walks yesterday. There were people that, we didn't recognize anybody that was on it. They weren't necessarily related to the art world, which was wonderful. And I did a walk in Vancouver once, and I had this one fellow, because it was posted on a food blog, and so we had foodies coming, and so there's this one fellow who just loves salt, and he was so excited. And to him, it wasn't even art. It was just a way to be around other people who are invested in salt. So I think the walk is something that's very simple but very beautiful, that we're so busy in our cars, we're so busy moving around. It's also that we're not rushing anywhere. And I just want to add one other thing, which Paul, you told me, I think it was last night, about because the location of Geary Place, you said your mother-in-law came once, but the walk was quite hard for her, right? And I was thinking about that when I left Geary Place last night, and I got directions on taking public transit, and I walked from Geary Place to is it Dufferin? And just that walk was really interesting. Like there was nobody there. I felt everybody who was at the performance behind me. It was really kind of present in my body. I was walking in this direction. I didn't see anyone, and then there were a few men walking by, and I thought about being a woman walking on the street and getting close. And I thought about your mother-in-law walking, and I thought it was just something like that became this really deep experience in some way. So something so simple. And that's what I enjoy about doing this kind of work, is it's things that are often overlooked or invisible we bring to the surface in some way.
Elizabeth, would you like to also respond to that sense, body, mind, providing space for something special?
I'm not sure I have anything to add. I am what you said resonates very much with my own practice. I'm interested in the peculiarity or particularity, I should say, of the social group of people on the walk. I am not a purist sound walker, but I do sort of follow that lineage, and I do so because I think it accomplishes two main things. First of all, in the lineage of the sound walk, it's about listening, but it also is a particular bond that puts an identity on the group. Like you say, this group of people come together for this purpose, and when they're asked to talk as little as possible, and I've had some people who are like, no way were they not going to talk. So it's a particular kind of social group. I use the word enabling because that's extremely important to what I'm doing. So I think bringing people together, and I feel like I give a context and a structure, and then what the participants do in that is very open. And I necessarily get a fairly wide range of response, but I've never had anybody hit me or anything.
I also, enabling is also, like teaching, is like pedagogy. You share this interest in this.
Well, I'm not a teacher.
But what does a teacher mean? I mean,
Somebody's got a job.
I think teaching is wider than that, and pedagogy, and if you're exploring pedagogy, it's wider than that. Educate, knowledge is something that's shared in a circle. I mean, I think I would pressure you to.
Well, you see, I'm going to
Yeah.
disagree because I get back to the word enabling. I'm working on creating a context and a structure to enable others. So, like, I want to
share larger knowledge. How can that not be a teacher?
Like I said, how hard I worked on trying to get the sex workers to participate. And I thought very carefully because I wanted to make sure I wasn't being exploitative. Because I do make it very clear that when you speak into my recorder, you do so giving me permission to use your audio. I went to different groups who have no relationship with art for the most part, except for the art students. I'm very indebted to the School of Fine and Performing Arts at Brock University, because I wouldn't have had, there were 100 people who walked in 17 walks, and I wouldn't have had that many if it wasn't for the art students. But for the rest, I'm losing my train of thought here, but my point is, I wanted to reach out to ask people to participate so that they were contributing their knowledge. And I was really happy with that result, even though, as I say, I wasn't, I don't know, maybe 60% successful with my outreach. I already mentioned I didn't get the naturalists. I didn't get the Welland Canal, because there's a lot of ruins of the first and second Welland Canal. It's called Canal Valley, right? Didn't get the Welland Canal experts, and it was pointed out to me it's just because they're old men who are too old to do the walk, you know, so.
Yes. Well, yes, sometimes, as you said, you ask and people think you're crazy and you have to find another strategy. And sometimes they don't get on board, but you keep walking. You've got lots more rock and roll shows coming, and they might come around to the salty path another time. And take it back to the floor, please. This is your opportunity to ask about the form of walking. Yes, Francisco.
Probably following up on some of what you already said, I think my question is around, ability and accessibility and all of the relationships of accessibility that you have to negotiate in a project like this. So because when you're bringing somebody, when you're going out of the gallery and into a site, there's all sorts of different protocols that you have to consider. Quite different if you're going into a kind of natural setting than if you're going into a private business, and if you're going into a park, which is public land. So could you talk a little bit about relationships of accessibility between yourself and the site, between yourself and the audience, and how that sort of triangulates?
Well, I guess for my practice, there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. So you have to be incredibly well prepared. So I do a lot of conversations ahead of time, asking questions. Like I say, days ago I went to a couple of the TCM shops on Dundas to see if I can bring a group in there. And so one of them I looked at and it was too small. I can imagine bringing a group in there would just be uncomfortable for the group, never mind the business, so I didn't even ask. And then the second shop I went to, I asked if we could bring it in, and they said no, unless they're shopping, they don't really want anyone in there, but you can stand outside, but they might actually ask you to move if that happens. So to me, it's really about being really well prepared. And doing the reconnaissance ahead of time, seeing if there's construction there, or seeing if there's anything that's could be difficult for certain kinds of people. But that's the interesting part of it, is in terms of form giving, this idea of what we do is form giving. I think that, you're thinking about the space and time in a very, it's almost like you're a project manager. you're almost anticipating all of those things that are part of it, so that when you do give the performance, the audience experience doesn't have to think about any of that in some way. So I really like that behind the scenes part. A lot of conversations. I don't know how you work, but I do a lot of like, I'll make drawings, I'll make notes. Like for the walk in Hyde Park, I made a little map of Hyde Park from the subway station where we met to the destination we were going, and I sort of drew the map where we were going, and then at each point I wrote what I was going to say at each point. I don't always adhere to that, but I think all of that is making sure that in terms of accessibility, the audience has a kind of seamless experience. It's the same thing when I'm teaching, right? Do a lot of over preparation behind the scenes so that when you're teaching, students feel like you're in control, but also improvisationally, if something happens and it's good, you throw out what you're going to do. And the same thing with the walks. I mean, what I try to do more and more, I think this is a good group because people are invested in performance, is you can actually give up a lot more to the group. But sometimes you can't. And so part of it is, taking care of your audience in some way, making sure that they feel comfortable, making sure that, like one of the walkers today, her hearing wasn't great, so she only asked me near the end if I could repeat the questions because she couldn't hear the questions that people were asking. So those are all the things they need to be attentive to make sure that people feel comfortable. It's sort of what comes to mind.
A couple things come to mind for me, and that is wheelchair accessibility. It's a real issue with the work that I've been doing because I work so much on trails. And I have a grant application due on Tuesday for a project that I'm developing, which returns to the format I used in the 90s, where the audience walks. And I'm working with a group of artists. It's sort of like a multi-arts project, and it develops out of Confluence Field Trip and takes place in Confluence Field Trip number 2. And I had a really interesting run-in with the municipality because that's public land, and I'm interested in public space, as so many of us are, right? And there are interesting issues there. And so for Confluence Field Trips, I was taking groups of people. I did, by the way, work with the Carfax, Ontario Legal Clinic to get a disclaimer, which I posted on the website. And that was mostly because of the students, because the university is very particular about that, although they didn't ask me to do that. But recently, in this project I'm developing, I had a run-in with the culture division of the city of St. Catharines. It will happily resolve. A run-in is perhaps too strong a word, but the parks people had no problem giving me my permit because I knew I needed a permit, whereas I hadn't gone for a permit for this. But suddenly the culture officer said, we have jurisdiction over this, because I was bringing in some visual art installation. So the public art committee has to approve this. So I was commanded to make an appearance at the public art committee. Most of whom I knew, and they were totally on my side, but I challenged this woman, and it was a damn good thing. So accessibility, public space, who owns. A fascinating thing about a lot of the work that I've been doing is, fascinating to me anyway, my work comes from working with water. And the 12 Mile Creek where the confluence is, the university owns the slope down from the gallery in this particular site. The city owns the trail. Ontario Power Generation owns the bank, and they own the creek bed, and they actually own the flow of the water. This has a lot to do with another installation I did called Streaming 12. So I'm really interested in governance, and I work quite a bit, I have for many years, with treaties. There's a whole traditional territory page on Confluence Field Trips. I've worked a lot with the Nanfan Treaty. Anyway, I digress. I can go on and on. But governance and policy around public space is critical to my work.
I think land art and site-specific works and performances as well as this walking tradition and discipline, is always revealing what does public mean, which is contested constantly, right? And artists are often the first people there for a precedent of some kind, or challenging that. Good thing you challenged it, because they would have walked away feeling that they did actually have authority over that, and the less bureaucrats, the better, I would say.
I think of this work as cultural geography, but I've never taken a cultural geography course in my life, so that may be offensive to cultural geographers.
Or social architecture, and I'm not an architect either. Another question from the floor about walking, about water and salt. I bet you have a question.
I do.
You
Of
do? Go
course.
ahead.
I always do.
I'm quite okay with silence too, but go ahead, Paul.
Well, both of you talk about, there's a sense of these walks, one of the things they facilitate or enable or teach is particular ways of observing and particular ways of listening. But it seems to me that what both of you bring to the table is not only an ability to see and hear what's there, but also to see and hear what could be there, to see and hear what is impossible to see and hear. So, for example, the giant sewer line that's underneath us, we don't actually have a sort of sensory way of accessing that except by saying, okay, this is the trail, we're walking under it, and so, we're seeing all of these other things that get mapped onto it that aren't necessarily material or visible, but that are still part of place as well. And I think that's interesting in terms of walking as a practice that it seems to me there's an opening up that's not just about what would normally be accessible to us. I don't know either of you.
Well, I agree.
I guess for me, a lot of it has to do with kind of intersectionality, right? Of revealing not only things that are invisible, but things that aren't often brought together in a way. So, learning about history is really important to what I do, and learning about material history is particularly important. And then learning about political history. I'm intrigued with how SALT has been really instrumental in protest movements, in independence, in revolution in some way. So it's the way things, how you can bring things together that aren't often brought together, and it shines a new light. And the notion of invisibility is becoming more and more important to what I do. I'm currently working on a project in Vancouver with the theoretical physicists at UBC. And so the whole idea of physics is invisibility. And their challenge and why they're interested in working with us is what they can learn from artists about creativity and visualization, not for the sake of illustration, but how do they share what they know about subatomic particles to the layperson. So we talk a lot about metaphor. We talk about creativity in some way. We talk about communication. So this idea of invisibility somehow it's become a motif in a lot of what I do. And I think we go through this sort of, especially if you've been doing something for a period of time, it comes to points where you kind of understand it in new ways. So I think the idea of invisibility right now is what I'm particularly intrigued by, and histories that don't get told. So that's where the pedagogy comes in, is there are certain kinds of histories that get repeated over and over again, or something like salt. People think salt is bad for you, and so how can you take that apart and actually reveal through this intersectionality ideas about this material that have always been there, have been there for thousands, if not millions of years, and make them more present in some way. It also, for me, one of the things I like about the notion of embodiment is how your body knows. You learn how to listen. You learn how to see, you learn how to smell. So there's a kind of physicality and tactility to it that I really like. And the invisibility of our very bodies, the thing that allows us to breathe, allows us to move, is, in the case of what I'm working with now in terms of salt, is something that we take for granted. And I guess maybe it's as I get older, but I feel like there's certain kinds of things that are so precious and so beautiful that are very simple. And so this notion of invisibility becomes a way to be very present. On the one hand, present in the past, right? Learning as much as just present right now and here with all of these people who are invested in gesture, who are invested in the body, who are invested in bringing people together. These are often things that are invisible, but we make them visible through our practices in some way.
Again, I find so much resonant with what you say, Randy, and as you can see from what I've shown you about my work, history is very critical. And marginalized histories are critical just because of the reality, not just because, but because of the reality of the naming of Dix Creek. And I'm interested in marginalized contemporary life because the sex workers and the crack addicts who use that park, which is now being cleaned up, that's not a part of civic life that a lot of people acknowledge or want to see. Now there was just something in my, I know. So I learned a long time ago to not mention the S word because people didn't like it, but so I'm going to risk mentioning the S word, spirituality. And my life and work is very much led by my spiritual practice, which is the goal of direct experience. So walking in a place relates to that for me, but I keep it kind of quiet.
I'm totally hot on the S word. But I didn't know what it was when you asked me.
I thought it was sex.
I thought it might be sex, or it might be shit, but I thought.
I'm sure I heard somebody in the back room saying salt.
Right, for some. For only if you have high blood pressure. Don't worry so much about the salt thing, unless you have high blood pressure or heart pressure. Or you're taking medication that's going to be really, not that I'm a doctor, and I shouldn't be telling you this. But I am, a healthcare provider of a lower age rate. Generally, people are very freaked out about salt. Way too much. We are salt. So.
And water.
And water. So, keep drinking water and keep eating salt, unless you have these other things. Anyways, but I would like to, if you wouldn't mind, both talking more about embodiment, particularly around the idea of breath, body, mind, spirit, and would you reply to the S word in embodiment, a little bit more about embodiment. Embodiment, it does imply a certain kind of spirituality or transformation. I'm really interested in art that is transformative. I think both of you create work that is transformative through intersectionality, but also through transdisciplinarity, if I could offer that word up as well. So, Randy, could you respond? S word.
S word. Not sex.
Not sex. But we can talk about sex too.
Yeah. I guess from my perspective, because I'm trained as an academic, embodiments become more and more important to get out of the head in some way. And because so much of what I do is teaching, and I see teaching as a really important part of my art practice. I see the class as a kind of form giving. You have a certain amount of time and space to work in. But because I work so often with students and so often with younger people, they're invested in their bodies. They're invested in learning through doing in some way. And that's what art making is. It's learning through doing. So embodiment has sort of come through that, definitely, in terms of, like I say, working with the art students. But also I've done a lot of work with people who are dealing with the environment, with sustainability, and there are these ideas about how do you create change in people's behaviors. And you can say to people the coral reefs are dead. You can say to them, we've got global warming. It doesn't matter, it's all in your head. And so some of the theories now suggest that the only way we can actually create change is through the body. And you sort of change behavior, and the behavior might lead to a kind of conceptual understanding of those changes. So there's something about doing things without even saying that's what you're doing, and not even putting words to it, and then it becomes a kind of bodily knowledge. So I'm particularly interested in bodily knowledge and how do we know how to breathe, but also how do we learn how to breathe better. And also, with a yoga practice or a meditation practice, I'm always amazed at something so simple like someone teaches you a new way of breathing and it opens up your body in ways you hadn't anticipated, like spatially and things like that. And that's knowledge. So I guess partly coming, like I say, from an academic background, I'm really interested in embodiment as a form of knowledge, as a form of change, and the intelligence of the body, the intelligence of the material world in some way. In some ways, it's kind of hard to talk about it because language is of the mind, and it is a physical experience. I mean, I would agree with you, Elizabeth. I mean, I'm not reticent to use the word spirituality. I don't even know if I have a word for it, but I feel like a lot of what I do is about being connected to your body, being connected to the people around you, being connected to all species, and that is a kind of embodiment. So, we are, all things that are alive, whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal, it's that kind of being in tune in some way. I don't know that the walks I've been doing necessarily do that. I have this other walk that actually I proposed to the collective, but it was the salt walk that seemed to make more sense. The other walk involves a one-on-one walk and a conversation, which would take place as a kind of therapeutic experience. So there's the notion of the therapeutic hour, which is 55 minutes. So go for a walk for 55 minutes and have a conversation about whatever people want to talk about. So that is also a kind of embodiment, because that could take so many different forms. So I think that embodiment is an antidote, I guess, to the kind of lives that we live in some way. I also think, I find that in my spare time I do a lot of gardening, but also I've been doing more dancing in my living room, in my kitchen kind of thing, and doing it with, invite friends over for a dinner party and you end up dancing, and at first people are a little reticent, so you turn off the lights a little, that might help. But just that kind of, it just makes you feel good. So embodiment, I think, even if you're dealing with some health issues, even that physical movement, even though it still hurts, it still makes you feel good. So there's something about that I think is simple, like I've been saying, but also very profound.
Endorphins. You can't beat them. Elizabeth, do you have something you want to reply to that general area about embodiment?
Well, it's just sort of, I hardly know where to start. I thought, first of all, my one and only scholarly essay is in the first Caught in the Act, called Asserting Our Body. So you could read that. And
You can get a copy.
If you can get a copy, exactly.
Okay,
Oh, yeah, they're
here
on
you can get them on
Amazon.
Amazon
I saw one that was
$200.
like $1,000 or something.
So, I'm sorry, just bear with me. There was something here that I wanted to. Oh, here we go. So this is my Eminence Gree's text. It says in one paragraph, resisting our culture's privileging of the word, but having verbal proclivities, I've worked hard against my monkey mind to wayfind into my body. And those of you who are over the age of 60 know that, like others in the room, I started as a dancer. And then I became very head, and I maybe even was very, very head all along. And at a certain point in my work, I set out on a mission to de-head myself, and that was I think that was in the early mid-90s. And I did a work called Song for Blue Moon, and it took 6 years to make, partly because it took that long to get a grant, but because that's how long it took for me to feel that I was embodied, that I would perform in the way that I wanted to perform. And it was also done at the time, when I was homeless and it was just very hard to pay for classes and this, that, and the other, yada, yada. So to be embodied is like, I am embodied. But I have worked very hard at being embodied. And for me to talk about like seeing my practice as enabling, that also relates to my care with how I want to relate to being authoritative, like not being an authoritative voice, but being a facilitative, taking on that role. And that's just, my thing. It's not meant as a judgment against other modes of being.
No, but there are a lot of, I was just talking with someone yesterday about this, involving the fact that there is a strong interest and practice from these younger artists, younger than us.
That's very easy to do that.
Who isn't? God, I went to the drugstore the other day. I thought some teenager was selling me drugs. Anyways, this very kind and loving practice that comes through community-based and social practice and relational practice that I'm profoundly touched by. That and the work that they create. So there is this wonderful garden growing of this kind of work, which must come from art schools and other things, and just being in groups. So I can only have conjecture. But unless anybody else has another question, yes, I'm going to ask a question. Unless somebody has a question, because we're going to wrap up in about 5 minutes. So spill it. Are we moving on to sex yet? Yes.
I was wondering if either of you had been part of other walks that exist. I don't know if it's the same way here as in Boston, but there's a lot of therapeutic walks, like walk for breast cancer, or a midnight walk for families who've experienced suicide, or I don't know if you've been part of other walks that.
May I quickly ask a question? Are these fundraisers or are these specific walks that have things attached to them?
Fundraising, but it's just, there's a lot of them in Boston. Mm-hmm. So this idea of walking as therapy.
The idea of vigils, what people
vigils.
Vigils processions.
Yeah.
So I'll answer that. So vigils, take back the night. Mm-hmm. I have gone on walks with field naturalists where, you're going on a walk and you're learning about the 23 warblers in that forest. I have not been on the walk, but I have shared food and supported with the one group of Anishinaabe who do the water walks. Now, that's the hard work as far as I'm concerned. The Anishinaabe doing the waterworks, that's the real deal as far as I'm concerned. What I'm doing is pale in comparison, except we shouldn't compare. And what else there was something else, but it's escaped me now about walks, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, there's a woman named Jenny Shine who does sound walks in Vancouver. And I did that, was at Center A, Center for Contemporary Asian Art. And she and Andrew Lee did a sound walk through Gastown in Vancouver. And that was really, I'd heard about the walks, and there's a whole history of that in Vancouver at Simon Fraser University. That was really intriguing to go to garages and to sort of, they also had access to places which we wouldn't usually go through, which I kind of like. I like that idea of knowing that they've done all this work behind the scenes, and that was really lovely listening. So now it's something that I incorporate in the walks that I do, but it's also something I do when I go for a walk. Usually when you go for a walk alone, you are silent. Unless I seldom walk with earbuds. I never walk with earbuds, but I seldom walk with earbuds because I want to hear what's going on. And I like, sometimes you go for a walk and you pass by someone and you hear a snippet of conversation, and it's always quite wonderful. You kind of want to follow them and see where the conversation goes. So I've done that. And in terms of a vigil, it just reminded me of last year in my neighborhood, a woman was attacked in her own home. And everybody in the neighborhood rallied around, and we did a kind of vigil walk in our neighborhood as a kind of take back. And it was really quite amazing because it was definitely a rainy day, but how people in the community were marking that space, rewriting that space in a way. And she wasn't there, she'd actually gone somewhere else to take care of herself. But we had done it for ourselves, we had done it for the community, and that was very powerful. And I think it's something that's stayed with all of us in some way. So I think what your question asks is that there's different kinds of walks.
Right.
And each one maybe has a different purpose. I like the idea of the purposelessness of the walk in some way. Yeah, and it's also, I use the word peripatetic, right? I don't know if anybody's read Rebecca Solnit's book, Wanderlust, which goes through a history of walking. And and it's really comprehensive. So she talks about walking in terms of philosophers who would have to go on 3 to 4 to 5 hour walks in order to unfold an idea. It takes that long. So there's something about the time it takes to think something through. And then she talks about walking in terms of the Boy Scouts and the history of walking there. And then she talks about walking with Wordsworth and his sister, and they would go for these walks as a way, in terms of writing poetry, but also as a way of learning the landscape in some way. So I find a lot of that very inspirational, and it's intriguing depending where each of us live. I'm sure we have this challenge, is where do you go for a walk in your neighborhood when you've gone for a walk in your neighborhood so many, like I do, we do the same walk over and over again. And where I live, it's in Strathcona near Chinatown, it's kind of closed in. So it's interesting whether you choose to go north, east, south, or west. It's like there's this predictability to the walk. So there's this notion of how do I make this walk fresh? The same walk that I do every day. Never mind the art walks and things like that. So I feel like every day I go for a walk, and every day I try to see something that I hadn't seen before. And often it's something like graffiti, or one of the things I loved, a friend of mine came to visit from the UK, and he fell in love with the weeds in Vancouver. And so you're going for a walk, and between the sidewalk, the weeds were coming up, of course, right? But in the UK, it's been so civilized or civilizing, everything's been paved over, there's no place for weeds to come up. And just that comment made me aware of like these charming weeds that have a life of their own.
We got great weeds in Vancouver.
They're great.
May I very quickly mention in terms of walking, Idle No More was huge. In Niagara, we had like incredible walks, including like over the Peace Bridge, which there's a whole issue there with the Jay Treaty and Haudenosaunee on both sides of the U.S.-Canada border in January. I mean, it was, all of us on it will never ever forget it. There's Hamilton Perambulatory Unit was very important to me. When the Hamilton Perambulatory Unit, or HPU, came together, it kind of gave me permission, because I'm very obscure, right, and isolated, and I do that. I can call myself a walking artist. And there was one other thing. I have a dog. I don't think I'd be doing this work if I didn't have a dog. And where I live, if I get in my car, in less than 10 minutes, I can be in any number of incredible Carolinian forest zones. And I do that every day.
And if I may add one thing, back to the Global Walk Facebook page that I, for some reason, am promoting. I don't really even know them. But anyways, one of the histories of some of the people who contribute to this, they are from Central and South America. And the original cause of them walking was because they were constantly getting arrested. And it was less likely they were going to be arrested because they were mobile. So it was attached to street performances, street art actions, Clemente, the word concrete poets. If you didn't want to get dropped out of an airplane later that week, were doing your performances on the run, and if the cops were coming, you would disperse. So it was a strategy of survival. Keep walking, keep it moving. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you consider doing the barefoot walk on the 19th and sending things in. I don't know why I'm promoting that.
And my last walk is today at 4.
4 o'clock. Go with Elizabeth.